Twin sisters beg Billionaire to save their father, but he's stunned when he sees who it really is. Gideon Hayes surveyed the sprawling cityscape from his penthouse office atop the gleaming Apex Pharma Tower in Philadelphia. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the perpetual gray drizzle that seemed to have settled over his life since, well, for longer than he cared to admit. At 55, Gideon possessed the kind of sharp-edged, commanding presence that boardrooms respected and competitors feared. He had steered Apex Pharma, the company his formidable father built, into the stratosphere of global pharmaceutical giants. He had wealth beyond measure, influence that could sway markets, and a life curated to perfection, sterile, ordered, and profoundly lonely. The empire felt less like a triumph and more like a gilded cage. 20 years. 20 years since his younger brother, Daniel, had walked out after a final, explosive argument with their father, Elias Hayes. Elias, a man carved from granite and ambition, had envisioned both his sons helming Apex, but his rigid vision clashed violently with Daniel's more idealistic, perhaps more compassionate, view of the pharmaceutical world. Daniel had chafed under Elias's relentless focus on profit over accessibility, arguing for ethical considerations that Elias dismissed as weakness. The final fight had been brutal, ending with Daniel renouncing the family name and fortune, disappearing without a trace. Elias, wounded in his pride, had forbidden any mention of Daniel's name, effectively erasing him from the family history. Gideon, caught between loyalty to his father and love for his brother, had been paralyzed. He made half-hearted attempts to find Daniel in the early years, hiring investigators who hit dead ends, easily discouraged by Elias's disapproval. Then, Elias's health declined, demanding more of Gideon's time and energy. When Elias passed away a decade ago, Gideon inherited the throne, the immense responsibility, and the suffocating silence surrounding his brother's absence. He poured everything into Apex Pharma, building it relentlessly, perhaps hoping success would fill the void Daniel's departure and Elias's coldness had left. He dated sporadically women often more interested in the Apex name than the man, but never married, never had children. His life was a relentless cycle of meetings, strategic decisions, global travel, and rattling around alone in his palatial Rittenhouse Square condominium. He was respected, admired from a distance, but not truly known, not truly connected. The rain outside seemed to seep into the room, a damp chill that mirrored the one in his soul. He glanced at the clock. Nearly 7 p.m. Time to retreat to the silent comfort of his empty home. He buzzed his longtime executive assistant, Martha. Have Richard bring the car around, Martha. I'm heading out. Right away, Mr. Hayes. Her voice crackled through the intercom, efficient and impersonal as always. Gideon shrugged on his tailored overcoat, the expensive cashmere doing little to warm the internal chill. As he rode the private elevator down, he caught his reflection in the polished doors of a man who had everything and nothing that truly mattered. The memory of Daniel, vibrant, passionate, argumentative Daniel, flickered in his mind, sharp and painful as ever. Where had he gone? What had become of him? After 20 years, the questions still haunted the quiet moments, unanswered echoes in the vast emptiness of his success. Miles away, in the struggling Kensington neighborhood, the rain wasn't a melancholic backdrop. It was a real problem, leaking through a stained patch in the ceiling of a cramped, second-floor apartment. 12-year-old Anna Hayes carefully positioned a dented cooking pot to catch the drips, her movements economical and practiced. Her twin sister, Emma, huddled on the threadbare sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket, anxiously watching their father. Daniel Hayes lay on a sagging mattress in the corner, his breathing shallow and labored. At 53, life had etched deep lines onto a face that still held the ghost of Gideon's features, but softened by hardship and illness. His broad shoulders were stooped, his hands, once capable of fixing anything, now trembled with weakness. Congestive heart failure. The clinic doctor had diagnosed months ago a cruel consequence of years of untreated hypertension, stress, and the physical toll of low-wage labor jobs. The medication helped, but it was expensive, a constant drain on their meager resources. Lately, even with the pills, his strength was fading fast. 20 years ago, Daniel had stormed out of his father's opulent mansion, fueled by righteous anger and youthful pride. He'd wanted Apex Pharma to be different, to prioritize research that could help people regardless of profit margins. His father's dismissive refusal, his insistence on the bottom line above all else, felt like a betrayal of everything Daniel believed medicine should be. He'd vowed to make his own way, free from the corrupting influence of the Hayes fortune. He drifted, working construction, driving trucks, eventually landing in Philadelphia. He met Maria, a warm, kind waitress with laughing eyes and a generous heart, who loved him for himself. Knowing nothing of his wealthy origins, a secret Daniel guarded fiercely out of shame and a stubborn refusal to ever go back. They married, and Anna and Emma arrived, filling their small apartment with love and laughter that temporarily overshadowed their constant financial struggles. Then, 5 years ago, Maria had succumbed to a sudden, aggressive form of pneumonia, their lack of quality healthcare access sealing her fate. Grief-stricken and now solely responsible for his daughters, Daniel's health began its slow decline. He worked when he could, but his weakening heart made steady employment impossible. Pride kept him from seeking help, even from charities. He couldn't bear the thought of pity, especially the potential pity of the family he'd renounced. The girls were his world. Anna, serious and pragmatic like him in some ways, managed their household with a maturity beyond her years. Emma, sensitive and artistic like her mother, provided the emotional sunshine, quick with a hug or a hand-drawn picture to cheer her father. They knew their father was sick, knew the whispers about his bad heart. They saw the dwindling pill bottles, heard his pained gasps for breath at night. One evening, while Daniel slept fitfully, Anna was tidying his worn wallet, trying to organize the few crumpled bills. Tucked behind his expired driver's license, she found a faded photograph she'd never seen before. It showed a younger, healthier version of her father standing beside another man. They looked strikingly similar, both grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing in front of an impressive-looking building. "Who's this, Daddy?" Anna had asked later, showing him the photo. Daniel had flinched, his expression clouding over. That's my brother, Gideon," he'd mumbled, quickly taking the photo back. For a long time ago, before things changed. He offered no further explanation, but the name stuck with Anna. A few weeks later, Anna saw a local news segment about Philadelphia's most influential business leaders. A picture flashed on the screen, the man from the photograph. Gideon Hayes, CEO of Apex Pharma, a billionaire. Her uncle, the man whose company made medicines, maybe even the kind her father needed. A desperate idea began to form. She talked to Emma, who was initially scared but quickly agreed. Their father was getting worse. They had no one else. "He looks like Daddy," Emma whispered, studying the news photo Anna had carefully torn from a discarded newspaper. Maybe he'll help." "He has to," Anna said, her young face set with grim determination. "He's family, even if Daddy doesn't talk about him." They knew where the Apex Tower was. They'd seen it gleaming downtown. They didn't know Gideon Hayes' routine, but they knew they had to try. Tonight, with the rain pouring down and their father's breathing growing alarmingly faint, felt like their last chance. Bundling up in worn jackets, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, Anna and Emma slipped out of the apartment and into the stormy Philadelphia night. The heavy glass doors of the Apex Pharma Tower hissed open, releasing Gideon Hayes into the blustery, rain-swept evening. Richard, his long-serving driver and head of security, held a large black umbrella aloft, shielding Gideon as they walked the short distance to the waiting black sedan, its engine purring quietly at the curb. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, creating shimmering halos in the downpour. Gideon was already mentally reviewing the quarterly reports he planned to read tonight, his mind miles away from the immediate surroundings. Suddenly, two small figures darted out from behind a parked van directly into their path. They were soaked to the bone, their clothes thin and ragged, hair plastered to their faces. Richard instinctively moved to intercept them, his hand going discreetly to his sidearm holster under his jacket. "Mr. Hayes, stay back," he murmured, stepping protectively in front of Gideon. But the girls weren't deterred. They skidded to a halt, their eyes wide with desperation, fixed not on the imposing security guard, but on Gideon himself. The taller one, her face pale but determined, spoke first, her voice trembling but surprisingly clear over the drumming rain. "Mr. Hayes? Mr. Gideon Hayes." Gideon paused, surprised by the direct address, by the raw urgency in the girl's voice. He looked past Richard's shoulder. Twins, he realized, maybe 12 or 13. They looked utterly desperate, their small bodies trembling from cold and, he suspected, fear. Something in their stance, a fragile bravery against overwhelming odds, resonated with a deeply buried part of him. "Yes," he said, his voice unexpectedly quiet. Richard shot him a questioning look, but held his position. The second girl, her eyes brimming with tears, pushed forward slightly. "Please, sir," she pleaded, her voice catching on a sob. "You have to help us. It's our father. He's dying." Gideon frowned. Children begging were not uncommon in certain parts of the city, but usually near tourist areas, not outside his corporate headquarters. And these girls, there was something in their eyes, a familiarity he couldn't quite place. He felt an unexpected pang, an unwelcome crack in his carefully constructed emotional armor. "Your father?" Gideon asked, stepping slightly out from behind Richard, ignoring the driver's subtle signal to get into the car. "What's wrong with him?" "His heart." The first girl, Anna, though Gideon didn't know her name, yet choked out. "He has a bad heart condition. The medicine. We don't have enough money for the medicine anymore. He can barely breathe. He needs help now," Emma added, tugging on her sister's sleeve, her gaze fixed imploringly on Gideon. "We saw you. On the news. Apex Pharma. You make medicine. We thought. Maybe." Her voice trailed off, overwhelmed. Gideon hesitated. His rational mind screamed caution. It could be a scam, a setup. Richard was already subtly scanning the street, alert for any accomplices. But looking at the girls' rain-streaked faces, their genuine terror, the flicker of resemblance he couldn't pinpoint, his usual detachment failed him. Elias would have scoffed, told him to let security handle it, called them grifters. But Elias wasn't here. And Daniel had always been the one to stop for the underdog. "Where is your father?" Gideon asked, the decision made before he fully processed it. Relief washed over the girls' faces, so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Not far," Anna said quickly. "Kensington. We can show you. Please hurry." Richard looked aghast. "Mr. Hayes, with all due respect, this isn't advisable. We don't know these dash. It's all right, Richard, Gideon interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Get in the car, girls. He opened the rear door himself, ushering the stunned, dripping twins into the plush leather interior. He slid in beside them, the scent of rain and poverty suddenly sharp in the pristine vehicle. Richard, Gideon said, meeting his driver's worried eyes in the rearview mirror. Take us where they direct you. As the luxury sedan pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the gleaming tower behind, it sliced through the rain-soaked streets, heading toward the part of Philadelphia Gideon hadn't visited in decades. He glanced at the two small, huddled figures beside him, their hands clasped tightly together, their eyes fixed on the road ahead, unaware that they were leading him not just to their dying father, but towards the ghost that had haunted him for 20 years. The drive to Kensington was a study in jarring contrasts. The sleek sedan navigated streets that grew progressively narrower, the well-maintained downtown facades giving way to boarded-up storefronts, crumbling row houses, and overflowing trash cans. Graffiti adorned brick walls like urban hieroglyphs telling tales of neglect. Gideon stared out the window, a knot tightening in his stomach. This was the Philadelphia hidden from view in his boardrooms and society fundraisers. Had Daniel ended up somewhere like this? The thought was inconceivable, yet the girls beside him were heartbreakingly real. Anna provided quiet, precise directions, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma huddled against her sister, occasionally casting wide, fearful glances at Gideon, as if expecting him to change his mind and eject them back into the storm. Richard drove in tense silence, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings through the rain-streaked windshield. Finally, Anna pointed. It's that one. The brownstone with the boarded-up window on the first floor. We're upstairs. Richard pulled the car to the curb, the luxury vehicle looking glaringly out of place on the derelict street. Mr. Hayes, I strongly advise I accompany you, he said, his voice low and urgent. No, Richard. Wait here. Keep the engine running and call Dr. Peterson at Penn Medicine. Tell him I may have an emergency cardiac case requiring immediate admission, potentially critical. Use my name. Gideon's voice was calm, authoritative. He needed to see this through himself. He opened his door and stepped out, the umbrella instantly insufficient against the driving rain. The girls scrambled out after him, leading him towards the dilapidated building's entrance. The main door hung slightly ajar, revealing a dimly lit, musty hallway with peeling paint and cracked linoleum flooring. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and stale cooking odors. This way, Anna whispered, leading him up a narrow, creaking staircase. Their apartment door was unlocked. Anna pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The single main room was sparsely furnished, but surprisingly tidy, albeit worn. The leaking ceiling dripped rhythmically into the pot Anna had placed earlier. And there, on a mattress in the far corner, lay the reason for their desperate journey. A man, pale and still, blankets pulled up to his chin. His breaths were ragged, shallow gasps that hitched painfully in his chest. Even from the doorway, Gideon could see the blue tinge around his lips, a sign of severe oxygen deprivation. His first instinct was pure CEO, assess, act. He reached for his phone to call 911 directly, overriding Richard's call to the specialist, wanting immediate paramedics. But then Anna and Emma rushed to the bedside. Daddy? Daddy, we brought help. Anna cried softly, touching his arm. Gideon moved closer, his gaze fixed on the sick man. The light from a single bare bulb overhead was dim, casting long shadows. He needed a better look, needed to assess the man's condition more clearly before the paramedics arrived. He leaned down, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He saw the lines of pain etched around the man's mouth, the sweaty pallor of his skin, the way his hand weakly clutched his chest. And then he saw the face. Older, gaunter, ravaged by illness and hardship, but unmistakably, terrifyingly familiar. The shape of the jawline, the curve of the brow, the faint scar above the left eyebrow identical to his own from a childhood treehouse accident. Time seemed to stop. The rhythmic dripping of the leak, the man's labored breathing, the distant city sounds, everything faded into a roaring silence in Gideon's ears. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Daniel had vanished. He wouldn't be here in this place like this. But the face beneath him was Daniel's, his brother. The phone slipped from Gideon's numb fingers, clattering onto the worn floorboards. He felt his knees buckle, the strength draining out of him. He staggered back, catching himself against the peeling wallpaper, his own breath suddenly tight in his chest. Daniel? The name was a choked whisper, torn from his throat, thick with 20 years of silence, anger, and buried grief. Daniel, my God, is that you? At the sound of his name, spoken in that unfamiliar yet deeply known voice, the man on the bed stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes clouded with pain, but still holding a spark of recognition. They focused, hazy at first, then widening slightly as they took in Gideon's shocked face looming above him. A flicker of disbelief, then shame, then weary resignation passed across Daniel's features. His lips moved, forming a single, hoarse word that cut through Gideon's disbelief like a knife. Gid, he rasped, the old childhood nickname raspy and faint. You came. The world tilted. The floor seemed to rush up to meet Gideon. The billionaire, the titan of industry, collapsed onto the grimy floor of the Kensington tenement, the carefully constructed walls around his heart shattering completely. His brother, lost for 2 decades, was here, and he was dying. The moments after Gideon's collapse were a blur of panicked action and raw emotion. Anna and Emma rushed to Gideon's side, terrified, unsure if he too was now sick. Uncle Gideon, Emma cried, shaking his arm gently. The use of the title, likely pieced together from the photograph and news reports, barely registered in Gideon's shocked state. He pushed himself up, shaking his head to clear it, the reality crashing down on him with brutal force. Daniel, his brother, here, dying. The CEO took over again, adrenaline cutting through the shock. He retrieved his phone, his hand shaking, but his voice firm as he barked orders into it, first ensuring Richard had elite paramedics from Penn Medicine en route with top-tier cardiac support, overriding standard protocols, then calling Dr. Peterson directly. Alan, it's Gideon Hayes. Forget what Richard said. It's not just a cardiac case, it's my brother. Daniel Hayes, get your best team ready. Now, the authority in his voice was absolute. The paramedics arrived with astonishing speed, their professionalism a stark contrast to the chaotic emotion in the room. As they worked efficiently, stabilizing Daniel, hooking up monitors, administering oxygen, Gideon stood back, watching numbly. He saw the faded photo Anna had mentioned earlier lying on a small bedside table, him and Daniel, young, carefree, immortal. A lifetime ago, the ride to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania was tense. Gideon rode in the ambulance, refusing to leave Daniel's side. The twins followed with Richard in the sedan, their faces pressed against the window, watching the flashing lights carrying their father away. At the hospital, the full weight of Gideon's influence became apparent. A top cardiac team, led by Dr. Peterson himself, was waiting. Daniel was whisked away for immediate assessment and intervention. Gideon found himself in a private waiting room, sterile and quiet, the polar opposite of Daniel's apartment. Anna and Emma arrived, clutching each other's hands, looking small and lost amidst the imposing hospital environment. Gideon knelt before them, the earlier shock replaced by a wave of conflicting emotions: anger at Daniel's stubborn pride, guilt over his own inaction, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness towards these two girls, his nieces, who had saved their father and inadvertently shattered his carefully ordered world. "Your father is very sick," he said gently, trying to shield them from the worst of the medical jargon he'd overheard. "But he's in the best possible place. These doctors are miracle workers." "Is it because of the medicine?" Anna asked, her voice small. "That he didn't have enough?" Gideon's heart clenched. "That didn't help," he admitted honestly. "But his condition is serious. It might take more than just medicine now. Maybe surgery." He saw the fear in their eyes and quickly added, "But we will give him everything he needs. Everything. I promise you that." Hours crawled by. Dr. Peterson finally emerged, his expression serious. "Gideon, Daniel's condition is critical. Severe congestive heart failure, significantly advanced. His heart is badly damaged. Medications alone won't be enough long-term. He needs intervention, likely a heart transplant down the line, but he's too weak for that now. We're stabilizing him, using some advanced therapies, including Apex's new cardiac support drug, the one still in late-stage trials, but approved for compassionate use. It might help bridge him." Gideon nodded numbly. An Apex drug. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very company that had driven Daniel away might now be instrumental in saving him. When Daniel was stabilized in the cardiac ICU, Gideon was allowed in. Hooked up to a maze of tubes and monitors, Daniel looked incredibly frail, but his eyes were open, lucid. The anger Gideon had felt dissipated, replaced by a profound sadness. "Why, Danny?" Gideon whispered, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Why didn't you call? All these years, living like that, letting it get this bad?" Daniel looked away, shame etched on his face. "Pride," he rasped, his voice weak. "Stubborn Hayes pride. Couldn't face you, face father's ghost. Couldn't admit I failed. Couldn't let you see." "See what? Real life? Struggle?" Gideon's voice rose slightly. "I would have helped. Damn it, Daniel, you're my brother." "I didn't want your help," Daniel whispered. "Not like that. Not a handout from the Empire I walked away from." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked towards the door where he knew his daughters were waiting. "But the girls, they changed everything. Couldn't let my pride kill their father." The twins were allowed brief visits. They crept to the bedside, their faces filled with love and worry, holding Daniel's hand, whispering encouragement. Seeing their quiet devotion, the fierce love that had sustained Daniel through his self-imposed exile, began to chip away at Gideon's remaining resentment. These girls, his blood, had shown more courage than he had in 20 years. The conversations between the brothers in the following days were halting, difficult. They revisited the old arguments, the towering shadow of their father, the differing philosophies. Gideon spoke of his loneliness, the burden of the company. Daniel spoke of Maria, the joy and hardship of raising his daughters in poverty, the crushing weight of his illness. There were flashes of anger, moments of painful honesty, long silences filled with unspoken regrets. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a tentative reopening of doors long slammed shut. The chasm between them was vast, but for the first time in 2 decades, they were finally standing on opposite sides, looking across and talking. Daniel's recovery was a slow, arduous process. The cutting-edge medications, including the Apex Pharma trial drug administered under compassionate use protocols, stabilized his condition, pulling him back from the brink. But the underlying damage to his heart remained severe. He would need meticulous management, potentially a transplant in the future, but for now, he was alive. Gideon spared no expense, ensuring Daniel had round-the-clock care, the best specialists, and eventually, a move to a rehabilitation facility. During Daniel's hospital stay, Gideon brought Anna and Emma to his vast, opulent condominium. The transition was jarring for the girls. They wandered through the museum-like rooms, intimidated by the quiet luxury, accustomed to the cramped, noisy life of their Kensington apartment. Gideon, unused to children, found himself navigating awkward silences and tentative questions. He hired a kind, understanding housekeeper who helped ease the girls' adjustment, buying them new clothes. They were touchingly grateful, yet almost afraid to wear them, and ensuring they had proper meals. He learned about their lives, Anna's quiet diligence with her schoolwork despite the odds, Emma's talent for drawing, their fierce love for their father, and the memory of their mother. He saw flashes of Daniel and Anna's seriousness, echoes of a warmth he barely remembered in Emma's smile. He started taking them out tentative trips to museums, the zoo, simple walks in the park, activities so different from his usual high-powered schedule. He found himself looking forward to their hesitant questions, their growing comfort in his presence. They were weaving themselves into the empty spaces of his life. When Daniel was finally strong enough to leave rehab, Gideon insisted he and the girls move in permanently. Daniel initially resisted, pride still flickering, but the logic was undeniable. He couldn't return to the Kensington apartment. He needed ongoing care and a stress-free environment. For his daughter's sake, he agreed. Living under the same roof forced a new level of interaction. There were still awkward moments, ghosts of the past lingering in the hallways, but also shared meals, quiet evenings where the twins did homework while the brothers watched TV in comfortable silence, and slowly, the rebuilding of trust. Gideon saw Daniel not just as the brother who'd abandoned him, but as a devoted father who had sacrificed everything for his children. Daniel saw Gideon not just as the inheritor of their father's rigid empire, but as a lonely man burdened by responsibility, capable of profound generosity. Inspired by the twins' desperation and his brother's plight, Gideon conceived the Twin Hearts Foundation. Working with Daniel and, increasingly, seeking input from Anna and Emma, they established a non-profit arm of Apex Pharma dedicated to providing access to essential cardiovascular medications for low-income families in Philadelphia and beyond. It was a way to honor the girls' bravery, address the systemic issue that had nearly cost Daniel his life, and perhaps begin to steer Apex Pharma slightly closer to the ethical ideals Daniel had championed 20 years earlier. The foundation launch was a quiet affair, not a splashy gala. Daniel, leaning on a cane, but looking healthier than he had in years, stood beside Gideon. Anna and Emma, dressed in simple but new dresses, nervously held the ceremonial scissors. Seeing his brother and nieces beside him, working towards a common good, filled Gideon with a sense of purpose far deeper than any quarterly profit report ever had. Later that evening, sitting in Gideon's library, Daniel looked at his brother. "Thank you, Gid," he said quietly, "for everything, for the girls, for forgiving my damn foolishness." Gideon shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. "There's nothing to forgive, Danny. We both made choices, lived with the consequences. But thank them." He nodded towards the doorway, where Anna and Emma were giggling over a book. "They reminded me what family actually means. They didn't just save you. They saved me too." He later formalized his commitment, setting up substantial trust funds for his nieces and amending his will to ensure both Daniel and the girls would be secure, making them heirs not just to his fortune, but to the complicated legacy of Apex Pharma. hopefully shaped by a renewed sense of purpose. Life wasn't perfect. The scars remained. But the silence in Gideon Hayes' life had been replaced by the sounds of family homework frustrations, shared laughter, the low murmur of conversation between brothers learning to talk again after 20 years. Anna and Emma, no longer just desperate children in the rain, hugged each other, whispering, "We have a dad and an uncle now." Their simple act of courage hadn't just brought a family back together. It had infused a lonely billionaire's gilded cage with the warmth of love and hope, building a new future on the foundations of forgiveness and rediscovered connection.